the referendum is arguably the most irresponsible act by a British government in my lifetime. That was Martin Wolf. He said, further, the UK would break up. Scotland, Ireland, and possibly Wales would all prefer to stay in the EU.
So the Brits will go to the poll to decide if they're staying in the EU or if they're leaving. But what will happen to the EU and the UK if they leave?
Well, if Britain stays, which is the Remain camp, there will be, I think, in the EU much more emphasis on the key issues of migration, jobs, and the real economy, which has probably been not very prominent in recent years, because the big concerns have been really dominated by Germany, and Germany dominated in terms of things like inflation and monetary supply and so on, not so much the real economy. Germany's doing okay, but the rest of Europe not. So we can't keep on following German economic policies. That's been the problem. In fact, Thatcher did that in the 1980s in Britain with the European monetary system, and it destroyed Britain's manufacturing industry. But in fact, that's got really nothing to do with the EU. This has got to do with the policy, the economic policy that you're following. So if Britain stays, and I hope they do, I'm in the Remain campaign, if they stay in the EU, then they'll be very positive for the rest of the community, because Britain has actually very, very good economists.
So let's say the UK leaves the EU. Will they continue to do business with other EU members?
Well, of course, business will always continue. But as one of the brightest economists I've heard of is Martin Wolf of the Financial Times, who said yesterday in the Financial Times that the referendum is arguably the most irresponsible act by a British government in my lifetime. That was Martin Wolf. He said, further, the UK would break up. Scotland, Ireland, and possibly Wales would all prefer to stay in the EU. So if Britain leaves, it'll be just England. But you asked about business. Most businesses, a poll out today, want to stay in the EU. You have to remember why. You can always find businesses who say, it's hurt us. Things hurt. All sorts of things hurt a business. You can always find somebody who's going to say something. What happened for the EU, and why is it fundamental for Britain, is that 15, 20 years ago, when Britain was deciding whether to join the EU or not, the big issue was where was the financial center going to be of Europe. It was going to be in Frankfurt, Paris, and the Milan Triangle. Now, when Britain was thinking of leaving, all the investment from abroad, which came through Britain and the city of London, which is one of the biggest probably the biggest stock market or the second stock market in the world, got really, really nervous. If Britain leaves the EU, all those American firms who bring in all their investment into London will start moving out towards Europe, because all the conditions will change. And it'll hurt the UK severely.
So a lot of people are saying that this referendum is just a distraction to distract the people from real problems, what are happening in the UK. My question is, what's going to happen to David Cameron after this vote for putting this pressure on the people?
He'll go. David Cameron is a PR man. I think he's quite a good one, actually. All right, David. Economics, not his strong point. He went into this referendum to win the last election. He announced that to keep the Tories in his government. In order to keep those people in the Conservative Party, he had to promise something, and he promised a referendum. Whether Britain wins tomorrow or loses, he's going to go. He's a PR man, and he's not done very well. In fact, he thought that this Brexit campaign would go his way really, really easily, that Britain would remain.
Yeah, and another actual thing in this campaign is immigration. That seems to be a big, important part, well, so the papers say. But how much is it really affecting us, the country England, and how much is it affecting the EU referendum?
Let me give an analogy with a bottle of wine. A bottle of wine has got 13% alcohol, right? You say, oh, that's okay. If it's got 14%, oh, that's okay. 15%, oh, that's getting a bit high. Oh, okay, so we look at that. Now, 0.1% on 13% is 13.1%. Does that mean you're going to reject a bottle of wine because it's 13.1%, not 13%? Absolutely no. That's the analogy to wine. 0.1% on the population of Britain is absolutely tiny, and we're going to reject a whole European nation and countries because of that? No. Britain must stay in.
Okay, and so my final question. I'm a British person working, living and travelling in Europe. What does this referendum mean for me?
Quite a lot. The thing is that capital has been moving freely between countries for a long time, but not labour. With the EU, anybody can cross borders and work in any other country. Anybody can go to any university in the EU. And there are all sorts of scholarships in the EU. And it's big, the EU. We're talking 350, 400 million, as big as the United States. So it's an important critical mass. So if we go out and the walls go up, then we can't travel into Europe so easily as before. You say that people can't travel into Britain as easily as before. I'm sorry, Britain is still a signatory to human rights acts, to the UNHCR accords, refugee accords and so on, which are international UN accords. It's not going to change at all anything to do with immigration in terms of conflicts. But in terms of personal individuals, what's going to happen is that your personal liberty will be quite strongly reduced over time.
Thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure having you in our studios.
Thank you. Very nice to be here as well. Thank you.
That wraps up today's interview, but don't forget you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram to get the latest with Dukascopy TV news.